Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas. And his Catholic faith is day 269. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 23 and 24 of the supplement to the Summa. That is, of communication with excommunicated persons and of absolution from excommunication. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, a 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code Summa 10. And so here we go. Article 1. Whether it is lawful in matters purely corporeal to communicate with an excommunicated person. St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, I wrote to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother, if he is guilty of immorality or greed, or is an idolater, reviler, drunkard, or robber, not even to eat with such a one. If this is the case with a drunkard, how much more those who have been officially cast out of the visible communion with the church and the reception of the sacraments through excommunication. Aquinas says there can be exceptions, though. Let's say, like, if you're an employee of an excommunicated boss, well, you still need to speak with him and have meetings with him at work, be in the same area as him. St. Thomas lists for us the categories of exceptions in these words. If anyone were to see an excommunicated person in distress, for then he would be bound by the precept of charity to assist him. These are all contained in the following line: utility, law, lowliness, ignorance of fact, necessity, where utility refers to salutary, or saving or salvific words, law to marriage, lowliness to subjection, that would be like an employee. The others need no explanation. Article 2, whether a person incurs excommunication for communicating with one who is excommunicated. And it seems to me that St. Thomas is saying here, if you communicate with the excommunicated guy in his crime, or the act of whatever got him excommunicated, if you cooperate in that, even now, you would be excommunicated as well. Or if the church, in excommunicating this particular man, forbade other Catholics who did not fall in the exceptions of our last article to be around him, that would be an excommunicatable offense as well. But as canon law looks like today to be articulating, this is of course coming from a non-canon lawyer, it looks like excommunication is more about liturgical sacramental exclusion than the commonplace interactions we have with people. Article 3, whether it is always a mortal sin to communicate with an excommunicated person, and other cases than those in which it is allowed. In a sentence from this article, giving clarity to the rest of the articles we've covered thus far, Aquinas says, it seems very hard that a man should be guilty of a mortal sin by uttering just a slight word to an excommunicated person, and that by excommunicating a person one would endanger the salvation of many, and lay a snare which might turn to one's own hurt. It seems to others more probable that he is not always guilty of a mortal sin, but only when he holds communion with him in a criminal deed, or in an act of divine worship, or through contempt of the church. And that seems reasonable to me. Now into question 24 of absolution from excommunication. Article 1, whether any priest can absolve his subject from excommunication. And canon law gives the exact stipulations for this, beginning in canon 1354, going to 1363 if one is interested. In a sentence from St. Thomas, it belongs to the same power to excommunicate as to absolve from excommunication. But priests of inferior degree cannot excommunicate their subjects, neither therefore can they absolve them. And again, for the relevant exception circumstances, one can consult canon law. Article 2, whether anyone can be absolved against his will. The sentence of excommunication is a juridical sentence. It can be given or lifted as the relevant authority wishes, and thus it is not contingent upon the will of the excommunicated. In a word from our article, wherefore, just as a man commits no sin except willingly, so no sin is forgiven him against his will. On the other hand, just as a person can be excommunicated against his will, so can he be absolved therefrom. Article 3 in our last article, whether a man can be absolved from one excommunication without being absolved from all. If a public official was excommunicated for desecrating the Eucharist as well as executing innocent people, for example, and he was absolved for the desecration of the Eucharist, he would still be under the sentence of excommunication because of the irresolution, non-absolution of the second offense. As Aquinas puts it here, bringing our episode to a close, excommunication is a punishment. Now a man can be loosed from one punishment while another remains. Therefore, a man can be loosed from one excommunication and yet remain under another. And that is all for a brief episode. We have just finished covering questions 23 and 24 of the supplement to the Summa, that is, of communication with excommunicated persons and of absolution from excommunication. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.